Hello, welcome to the Stockyard Industrial Lead. I'm Eric Miller, and today I want to talk to you about track standards. In the next several episodes, I want to go over in a little bit more detail about some of the details that I put into this small switching layout. A lot of them are questions that people have asked over, the last several episodes, about this or that, and I kind of realized, I haven't really covered these in detail, and so I thought I would go in a little bit more depth about some of these items. And so I want to start out talking about a couple things that I get from resources that are related to the real railroad. And so the first topic is going to be talking about track standards and also looking at things that are, track side, basically, things that you see along the railroad right of way, and where do we get these ideas from? I think a lot of the fun with model railroading is you get to kind of put in some of the things that you really like, whether it's following the prototype exactly or borrowing ideas from other parts of the railroad that you see. So for the Stockyard Industrial Lead, it's based on, as you know, former Rock Island main line, basically, that is now an industrial spur. And it's operated by the short line that is partly owned by the SPSF. So it's really hard to figure out exactly who to follow, whose standards or guidelines to follow. But in general, I'll just say that I loosely follow a lot of the standards and guidelines from the Santa Fe. I also borrow some stuff from the Union Pacific, since that's the closest Class 1 connection. So anyways, with that said, I've got a number of timetable resources. And so this is the number one resource that I use for the model railroad, for like a prototypical reference, if you will. Timetables are really fun to look at. They're not super expensive. You can find some pretty decent deals out there, like $5 to $10, if you go to, I don't know, shows or stuff like that. But I've basically bought all of mine off eBay. Anyway, so I have this old Rock Island one, which covers the area that my railroad is on, which is basically this part right here, just through after you pass through Omaha and get through Albright. And so this is interesting because it'll have some special instructions that might help you figure out how to operate. Now, this is the last timetable the Rock Island came out with in 1979. Obviously, my era is like 15 years later, so I've had to improvise a little bit, and so that's why I have like this Union Pacific timetable that's a little bit more helpful, and then also the Santa Fe. So for track standards and Lineside standards, there's also more resources that you can look at, and I'll put a little image up. One is there's books out there that are basically all about Class 1 railroad standards and things to follow. I haven't purchased any, but there's a Santa Fe standard out there that's really good. A lot of times you can actually just do an online search and find like maybe internet forums where people reference these without having to buy them. But one thing that's important for the timetables, besides just getting a general feel for example, of how you might want to set up your own timetable, so it'll give an example of what the stations and distances look like. But there'll also be a handful of special instructions in the back, which might be helpful for some operations on your layout. So let me see if I can just find, some examples. It'll go over like how to handle, specific cars and whatnot. And also it'll talk about like detectors and what, derails are used for spurs, etc. So a lot of handy operation stuff. It'll also have a signal chart, which is good. And so I've used this for my Washington Street signals here. Another good Lineside standard is for like mile markers that you might want to put up. And if you want to know how they should look, you can either use the standards, or you could also just go out there and observe for yourself and maybe take home a good example that you like. So for the signals that I've come up with, obviously these are both traffic and train signals, but I wanted to make sure that the train signals basically have an all stop or an approach. And so that's what I've come up with using the standards that I have in place. Okay, so let me show you another standard that I've come up with. This is where I think a lot of the fun is in being a model railroader. We get to have some creativity. I like to follow what are called clearance marker standards. And so this is something that I've picked up just based on my rail fanning. I've noticed out there that some railroads will have these little sections of track marked, and so you'll notice that I've done the same thing on my railroad, and this basically shows you how you can switch a car. And let me give you an example of that. Okay, so let me bring in a couple of freight cars to help demonstrate this. So let's say that this is the main line in front here, and this is going off into like a spur. And so you want to know, like, at what point do I stop the train in order to do some switching? And so this is the point at which you should stop the car so that you don't hit another car. And so obviously, and especially as a model railroader, you can figure that out yourself, right? Like, you're not going to damage the equipment that much if something kind of hits it a little bit. But I found this a helpful tool for other crew members that are guests operating on the layout, so that they know exactly where to stop the car. And again, it's just a kind of a fun little prototypical thing to do. And so then again, if we stop the train here, like if we're doing some switching and need to move this car to the end of the train, we know exactly where it needs to stop. And so as a general rule, what I do is I apply these anywhere you're essentially coming off a main line. If you're within the industry itself, like over here, I don't have that marked. And so what I've done is I've taken this from the Santa Fe standards, and I've created my own standard, which is, the Stockyard Industrial Lead Clearance Marker Standard. And so this is just kind of one of the fun things about the hobby, I feel, is doing stuff like this. And obviously you can take it as far as you want to, or maybe you don't want to have standards at all. I don't have a whole lot of track standards defined like this. This is just one of the few that I thought would be fun to do. So basically I say that when the diverging rails reach 8 feet 3.5 inches, or 13 feet between track centers. And so that's what I've done is essentially measured these out so that they equal that, and then that's when I paint the tie just outside of that. So that's an example of a track standard that you can adopt on your own layout. All right, so basically that's about all I wanted to show you today. I just wanted to make you aware of some of the track standards that I have on my layout, and some of the resources that I've used to get them, timetables, and also any books that are on railroad standards. And again, it might just be something that you see out there on the railroad when you're rail fanning. And also just online searches are really good resources to look for this stuff as well. But just wanted to make note of that. And again, this is something that you'll see when we're operating on my layout, and so I just wanted to explain that a little bit further. Now, next video I'm planning to do is going to be about looking at the track diagrams that I have and what the resources I've used for that. I've shown you a video in the past of how I make them, but I've never really explained how I came up with the concept and what I have used as references for that. So that's what I'm going to do next. And then I've got some other ideas after that. I'm going to try to sprinkle in some operations videos in between so it doesn't get too boring for you. But let me know in the comments below if you have any standards that you follow. And as always, thank you for watching, and let me know if there is anything else that you'd like to see about this layout. So I'll see you. Thanks again, and I will see you next week on the Stockyard Industrial Lead.